Hello, my name is Jason Leahy, Executive Director of the Illinois Principals Association. Thanks for joining me for this IPA talk. With me today, I'm fortunate to have Joe Fatheree. Joe, former Illinois it's always quick for me to say principal, but Illinois Teacher of the Year in this case, and also a global finalist for Teacher of the Year. I think was it back in 16, Joe, that you were named for
2016,
the
yeah, that
top
was
10 in the
a
world?
yeah, that was a different time in my life. It was great.
For sure, I hear you. Well, sure appreciate you spending a little bit of time with me today, and would like to get into your background a little bit. But the purpose for our conversation is to talk about AI and some exciting work that you're doing. Because you being the consummate learner you are, you're in your doctoral program and doing some research related to AI, which knowing you the way that I do, that has led you down a variety of paths in a variety of places all over the planet, actually, where AI is concerned. So I'd like to talk a little bit about that. But just for those that don't know you, Joe, would you mind just giving us a quick little synopsis of your background and the work that you've done over the years?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me on today anyway for this topic. And this is my 35th year in public education. Who knew it'd go that fast? And I
Yeah,
spent
boy.
the bulk of my time at Effingham Unit 40, where I ran one of the world's leading STEM programs for high school students. And I loved working with the kids. I loved watching their minds click as we take them through these projects. And AI kind of became, I guess, an offshoot of that. We tried to look for a lot of different ways for kids to be involved with technology. And I started my doctoral program at the University of Illinois a few years ago. I'm just about to wrap that up, hopefully. And my field of study, as you understand,
Oh,
my
yeah.
field of study is looking at the synthetic relationships that form between children and automated systems. And so I've just been, you know, the Illinois Teacher of the Year and the top 10 finalists for the Global Teacher Prize and the NEA recognition. I'm glad you brought that up because what it did, it really for me, all those avenues created new opportunities to meet new people. And without those, I don't know I'd ever come run across some of these people, but it gave me really the opportunity to work with some global leaders on what AI is going to look like in the K-12 setting. And so that's where I'm at right now. Really, what I'm looking at is the relationship side as these new automated systems come out, and principals and superintendents in the near future, we believe, are going to have intelligent tutoring systems with a new math curriculum or writing curriculum or et cetera. That, the cool thing is they'll have multiple teachers in the classroom, assistants that they can work with
Hmm.
and help facilitate conversations and can work with the individual needs of the kids. If you have, five or six IEP kids in a classroom, well, boy, you'd be able to work specifically with the needs of those kids, just like you would with a kid, as a gifted kid or a kid who's struggling with social emotional learning or whatever the case might be. Those are exciting elements, but also just making sure it's deployed responsibly. And as leaders, we understand the safety concerns about those things. So that's
Yeah.
kind of where I'm at right now, and just had this great opportunity to work with you guys to bring this survey to life.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it was definitely a pleasure to be a part of that. Let me just get down to kind of basics here, Joe. Like what is it about? I know you're just by nature a curious person and innovative, wanting to look at different ways of educating kids. So this might seem like a real obvious question, and maybe a little basic, but just what about AI in particular really sparked your interest in especially when it comes to choosing it for a focus for research in your doctoral program?
Well, there are some experts that liken it to the discovery of fire and the invention of agriculture.
Yeah.
So I may look that old, but I wasn't around at the beginning of those.
We're all right there with you, Joe. A few of us are anyway. Yeah.
And but to live in this time where AI and quantum computing and all of the things that are coming to life right before us right now, and I grew up in the age of the Jetsons, so we
Mhm.
conjectured a lot about it with cartoons and sci-fi movies, with Star Trek and Star Wars and things like that. But you always knew there was a certain degree of realism in the films, but when you shut it off, you knew you couldn't go out and pick up a lightsaber when you were a junior high kid and become,
Yeah.
Luke
I
Skywalker.
tried. I
I
tried.
did too. I had used
Yeah.
every stick off of a tree. They never zapped anything.
Yeah.
But I'm watching that happen now. And I'm watching it happening at an exponential rate where our parents and teachers are really struggling to stay ahead of it, or even to catch up to it. And so when I had in 2019, when I was asked to join the Institute for Ethical AI in Education, United Kingdom, we created one of the world's first model codes of ethics for AI and ed, and it's being used all over the planet right now. And that really, I got to work with luminary leaders all over the planet to study and have conversations. I got to work with students all over the planet. And when I came back, you come back home and I said, here, I'm like, well, how prepared are we? And so I was looking online, and Rose Lutkin, who's a professor at the University College of Education, London, um, she's a global leader in AI research and ed. She developed a tool to benchmark AI usage across the United Kingdom in schools. And so I thought, you know what, as we're getting ready to make all these new laws, I'm privileged to be on the governor's task force right now with this. And, I've done a lot of work in the policy space. I know everybody that's wanting to create policy wants to create policy that's strong and really can do what we want it to do. But as I've been thinking about this, we don't really know where we're at.
Yeah.
We know a lot of people are experimenting with it or they're not using it, but to have a better understanding of where we're at enables us to really, I think, start looking at maybe where we need to go and what type of policy needs to support that, or professional learning, or, administrative procedures, or,
Yeah.
whatever the case might be. So that really is what perked my interest. And it is also brought to life to me, as we'll get into the survey here in a little bit, as the administrators, who no fault of their own, I give them credit for championing this work in their districts. They really don't know where to turn.
Yeah.
And so, but with that, the kids are still using it at home. And so are we sure that we know what to do so that these kids, it's used safely with them, and we understand the implications that come with it. So that's why it ties into my research. And it's also why I'm so interested as a former classroom teacher and a grandfather, what kind of impacts are going to have for my grandkids.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, I'll just say specifically to the doctoral research, Joe, not that AI is brand new, but to take on something that is as new as it is without a deep historical research base behind it, as you're out trying, I'm sure to clamor for those studies to put in your lit review. I know how much of a grind that can be. But with all that being said, what I'm curious about before we get into the results of the survey that was administered here in Illinois, that you drove and that we supported along with IASA, the Illinois Association of School Administrators, or the SUPS Association. Like I'm curious, as you're talking with thought leaders, or communicating with schools in various places in the country or around the world, like where are you seeing AI being used, and maybe even being used effectively, as we're kind of still in the infancy of this for schools? Like
It's a
what are
great
some of the critical use cases you're seeing right now? And I'll just tack on to that, how are they making sure to be careful in their approach, and just take into account, some of the concerns we've got around safety or anything like that?
I think it's all over the place. It'd be like being a kid in the 1950s and turning on a TV show and watching the Wild West, because that's kind of where it's at.
Yeah.
And I don't mean that necessarily in a negative way. It's just we got a lot of people that are exploring and inventing and trying. Some
Hmm.
people are blocking it. They don't want anything to do with it.
Yeah.
Most of them I talk with, if they are trying it, I'm going to use the word experiment loosely, because it could be, I think Bob's using it down the hall, but they really don't know. And that's not a knock on anybody, because they don't really know the framework yet. I've got a handful of districts that I've been working with, and I know there's some other ones that out there that are taking a more scientific approach, and they're trying to develop they start with a committee, then they develop a framework. Call out a couple of schools who I know are doing it really well. I'm extremely proud of them. Champaign District 4, Bloom, both of those districts are doing really good work. Roger Avery's district is doing really good work in this space, and others. But, they really wanted to pull back, put a committee together, think about what tool there's going to use, make it the year of the teacher. So they had expiration, got measurement pieces in there to really go back and look about what they think's working and what's not. If we have a teacher that wants to try something with their students, asking them to kind of submit a proposal. And it's not because they're, wanting to put the thumb and slow things down. They just want to know
Mhm.
what people are doing so that they can replicate those things. And so it's really all over the place. I think that there are several states out there that have uh, guides in place that they would encourage you to take a look at as you're developing your own policy. We do not have a state one yet. I
Mhm.
think that will probably maybe grow out of the task force. And so I think there are a lot of people waiting. In the meantime, like I said, our kids are still using it. Teachers are frustrated and administrators because they don't necessarily where to go. One of the big issues that we're struggling with is authentic work and making sure kids aren't cheating. But
Yeah.
on the overall spectrum of things, if we really look at AI usage at what it is and what it's going to be, that's probably one of the smaller things. And I'm not trying to devalue that, but safe usage. How are you preparing for kids to work in a symbiotic relationship with technology? Like there's so many questions to be asked. That's just one of many of them, but that's the one most people know right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think, to go back to the policy side of things, I work in the state of Tennessee quite a bit right now, and the state policymakers there last year, I think they believe they were really trying to do the right thing when in April, I believe, of last year, they wrote into law that every district had to have on file by July 1st an AI plan. But that also came with no help. And so the districts that I was talking to across the state, they didn't know where to go.
Yeah.
And so I don't know that any of the plans, and this is not a fault of anyone, and I'm not blaming policymakers either, was the fact that I don't know that they're done with the fidelity that we need to have them done. So what I hope is we got to have something in place there, but there's a call to go back and make it better, to relook at it. And I am thankful here in Illinois that we're kind of taking the time doing it. I just think in the meantime, administrators and teachers, they need to kind of have some direction as to where to go.
Yeah. So you mentioned the task force that's happening here in Illinois right now, Joe, which you're a part of. We've got representation there. What types of conversations are you having? I mean, is it primarily around policy, or are we getting into in terms of parameters that school districts should be putting in place, or are we getting into very specific use cases for teachers and administrators for how to serve students?
Well, I think that's a great question. I think the first part was really, you have a lot of experts there. And what I do love the fact that when this task force was put together, it's not just the K-12 spectrum. It is, I mean, there's
Mhm.
business, it's across the board and I thought that was very intelligent because it's going to be in all different walks of life.
Yep.
And the fact that education is how we're prepping those kids to live in those spaces. So right now, I think it's been a lot of conversation about understanding AI usage better, from my sector to what it might look like in the medical sector, the entertainment sector. And I think in our subcommittee work, where we're getting ready to start having those deeper conversations with the case studies as to really what AI usage looks like there. So I'm chairing the K-12 piece, and I know we're just getting ready to have those conversations about what does it look like in schools, what are the struggles with, what are the benefits. I think this survey will help benefit us in that because now we have, you know, some feedback from
Mhm.
administrators across the state of Illinois, and just making sure that we understand what they feel like their needs are. I will jump ahead just a little bit that as we get into the survey side of things, one of the areas that I know needs to be better addressed is more input from large urban sectors. In the
Mhm.
survey, only 5% of the respondents were from large urban centers. And Jason, one of the things we talk about globally, and this was in places remember having a conversations 2.5 years ago in the UK where we were looking at AI usage and where it could potentially go and how teachers would use it. And the conversation was, we got like 700 to 800 million kids globally that don't even have access to school.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so how do you use AI to help create equal opportunities or try to at least level the playing field for those kids? We also have kids here that, that are not in those conditions, but they are still in very harsh conditions. And how can we utilize AI to transform those learning environments for those children so that they have an equal chance at success? And so by those schools not being represented in the survey, one of my number one callbacks for me is how in the future do I reach out, do a better job of reaching out to get more responses from people in those environments. So I
Yeah.
really want to make sure if it's not me that somebody else is doing that work, because what those voices have to be heard.
Yeah, well, obviously, what immediately comes to mind, Joe, as you reference that, is just equity of how AI really could be used to elevate equity of opportunity for kids and educational experiences. I thought about from the little bit of AI technology that I've seen that is very specific to the classroom experience, like Conmigo, for example, and there are others that are working on similar things, but just I was it made me excited the thought of maybe going back to the classroom again about how I would have approached that with my students very, very differently and how I would have acted as the instructor very, very differently with them than I did now over 20 years ago when I was in the classroom. But before we get to your findings from the survey, Joe, and what I do appreciate about the survey is it just really providing kind of a nice baseline for where are people right now, with this topic, as well as some other things that have been sussed out there. But the obvious question that comes to mind for people is or feeling maybe that comes with the whole thought around AI, particularly with education, is how do we make sure we keep kids safe? How do we deal with the cheating? You talked a little bit about that. You've talked about those things just a bit, but also, are instructors still going to be relevant with AI? And as I alluded in my comment there, I absolutely believe that they are, but obviously all of us as administrators and teachers are going to have to look at how we approach the business of educating kids very differently with such a powerful tool in our hands. But so that's just kind of my general sense of things, with not trying to get too specific. But how do you react to individuals as you're having conversations around AI that are concerned about it and maybe even concerned about themselves as an educator and where their place in the world is going to be as these tools continue to move forward and even become more powerful?
Well, no, great question. And I know the work we did in the UK, one of the things we really wanted to talk about, and this is where I visit a lot on school procedure guides or policy pieces, you really need to build that human element in now. I wouldn't wait 5 to 10 years when you're forced to do that.
Yeah.
It needs to be in there now. I conducted I did a lot of different workshops on this, from, whole school approaches to working with administrative teams to working with teachers. I was just with a group of teachers last week, and I had some drive a considerable distance to get to the event. And one of the guys that was there, he goes, "I'm just telling you, I'm here under duress." He goes, "I want nothing to do with this." And he had every reason. I said, I think it's providence that you're here today, because I said, people need to understand what you're concerned about. We can't address it if we don't know. So I always tell people on your committee, bring somebody who doesn't agree with you on here. They need to know how to disagree appropriately. But I think it's important we get, divergent opinions on those stuff so that we really look at it across the board. His reasoning was he wanted to make sure kids were not losing their agency in the classroom,
Mhm.
their ability to go down and dig and think critically. He wanted to make sure there was value in the teacher being in the classroom, all the things that you're talking about. And after we spent the day together, I asked him, I said, "I'm not here to sell this for you. I'm here to show you, I'm here to expose this to you." Then the day's like, holy cow, I didn't know I could do this stuff on the terms of productivity for myself, how I can increase my ability to spend more time with my kids. He goes, "There's still things I'm going to work through." And I said, "Yeah, we all are." But I said, that's why we want to share those things. And then I go back to, it could replace teachers, I think, if we allow that to happen. I think that would be one of the worst decisions
Yeah.
ever made. And I used this story several years ago. I had a student that called me on a Sunday morning, former student had called me on a Sunday morning, and that individual had just tried to commit suicide and it didn't work. And it was about 5:30 in the morning on a Sunday morning. And I got the call and my wife looked at me. She's like, what's going on? And I tried to let her know while I was trying to counsel this young adult. And thank goodness things didn't work and that individual could call me so we could get the help. But Jason, that kid didn't just decide to call me that day out of the blue because he didn't know me. It was from years of spending time together, working together in
Yeah.
the classroom setting, talking to that individual and his family outside of the school. That's what the value of the classroom teacher is. That's a a very difficult case, but you could apply it across the board. I co-chaired the North and South American Children's AI Summit a couple of years ago, and the very last question we asked was, how would you receive feedback from an AI as compared to your classroom teacher? And I had a little girl from Colombia, South America. She's 8 years old. And my goodness, like kid's smart. She looked me dead in the eyes and she said, I don't care anything about how the computer tells me that because it's programmed to do that. My teacher tells me because she loves me.
Yeah.
And so that to me is from the mouth of babes and what we want to keep going forward. I will say, I think as we continue to advance this work and systems can connect like we're doing right now, and it's able to build empathy into them. It's able to read your emotions and do things, and it's going to be able to customize those relationships. I do think that gets more convoluted. But so I think it's on us as administrators and teacher leaders to build the breadcrumb trail for our kids to get out of this space
Yeah.
so that they can work and they understand the value of real human life. It doesn't mean there's not a place for this, but this is not the only place, and it should not be the only place because human life to me is much more important.
Yeah, totally agree. Appreciate that anecdote too. Kids have an amazing way of just getting right to the heart of the matter here, quite literally,
They
and
do.
in that case. So, talk to us a little bit about the survey, Joe, and what it is that you were hoping to accomplish, and what it is that we found as a result of just starting to get kind of a perception of the landscape of where our school leaders are in this state, because I know we had superintendents, principals, and some other district and building leaders taking this. So just share with us about the survey and where we are.
Well, I think for me, it hasn't shocked anybody that's in the administrative space or that they're trying to deliver AI usage in schools. I think we all knew that, there hasn't been a lot of support. People are trying really, really hard. They don't know necessarily where to go, as you mentioned earlier, in my quest to learn more about this. You imagine being a district leader, and all of a sudden one day you wake up and Chat GPT is available. And how in the
It's
last
kind of
two,
what it felt like. It's kind of
yeah,
what it felt like, right?
you didn't have any warning. It just showed up one day and it's there. And now, with all the other things you've got going on in your building or your district, you have to deal with this.
Hmm.
And with the way it works, from my perspective in the administrative world, it's, every day I wake up, I look and see how many fires I've got to put out. Those get addressed first. And
Yeah.
then what I try to do is get to the visionary work that I have. Some days I do a better job of that, and others just depend upon the demands of my job. Well, and a lot of those that you are dealing with, they've been around hopefully long enough, that there's crowdsourcing and there's other things that are going on. We experienced a much more worst case scenario when COVID came out and all of a sudden we had to shut schools down and we're trying to figure this out on our own. But we also immediately had support from state and federal agencies to make sure that, they were figuring it out too, but you knew you were all in it together. This has yet to come together like that. And so I was not surprised to find that, well, one, we had good representation from suburban and rural areas. Again, urban, not so much. We had a lot of the superintendents were heavily involved in this, which I was grateful to see that a lot of district leaders took that on. The rest of them was a split between building administrators and probably people who were tech coordinators,
Hmm.
jobs like that. Um, it was kind of a split amongst grade levels and, where the representation was from there. No one really expressed a high degree of confidence in actually using AI. It was interesting from the anecdotal notes that we had at the end that there were some that were moving in that direction. There were a couple of districts thought they were making pretty good headway on that. There were some others that just, this is ground zero for them, and they're really not sure where to go. So areas that I thought hit me hard was um, lack of confidence. And again, this is no one's issue. It's just where we're at. Lack of confidence in creating an environment where AI is being used in a safe manner to make sure that the bias, the equity, the student, the data safety pieces, that we have a deep understanding of what that looks like. And as I talk to districts out there about how to message AI usage to the greater public, my very first thing is, I would encourage you to have messaging that lets them know whatever you're doing, the number one concern of yours is the safe usage of AI in school for the
Yeah.
children. That's
Yeah.
what parents, they just need to know that. And I don't think there's a high degree of confidence in that space right now because they really don't know what training looks like. And, I do a lot of training right now on what deep fakes look like
Mm.
and
Mm.
how to validate work. And it's really, really, really hard. And so we talk about when kids go out in the community and there are scams that are being run or there are campaigns on the internet. How would you know that? And so we've talked a lot about digital citizenship. I know there are schools that have digital citizenship and they're with varying degrees of fidelity. I do think that this survey is a call out statewide, Jason, for us. We've got to figure out how to make that work moving forward.
Yeah.
And we may have to figure out what we have to take off of your plate to make that happen because you've already got enough on your plate. But
Yeah.
if safety is our number one concern, then we need to make sure this is done safely. And we have feedback to people who are responsible for the safety piece so that they, like you were saying earlier, how do we measure that? And right now we don't know. At least I haven't seen good measurement tools on it. I think the equity piece was another big one for me, and everybody sees equity a little bit differently. And so, what does equity look like in urban, suburban, and rural? And how do schools get prepped for that? Professional learning is another one where districts really are trying to figure out where do I go and what do I offer. And by the way, I've got 10 other things that I need to be doing professional learning on as well. And those are all incredibly important. There were, as when I talked about, do you have a plan in place for your districts? Um, Little concerning that there are some districts that just, they haven't taken a look at that yet. And so I don't think that means you have to have a plan in place, but are you starting the conversation on how you're going to address this beast? I did have an administrator I talked to a few weeks ago that he was in a session of mine and he said, I'm still trying to figure out AI, but what I know is my kids are using it.
Yeah.
And he said, I know the farther it gets away from me from doing something controlled, systematic at our district, at our building and district level, the more I know how much harder it's going to be for me to bring these kids back.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I think those were the things that really hit me hard. Everybody had that I've talked to so far has had their piece that's really hit them. But when I looked at, I think it was like 11.4% feel that they are confident in creating a safe environment for this space. That one is the one I think that hit me the hardest because that to me is the first area we need to go.
Yeah, and that's not a large number of, that's not a high confidence percentage there by any stretch. Before touching on a couple of things that you discussed, Joe, related specifically to the survey, I want to come back to, because you mentioned this a couple of times about kids are already using it. And I think generally we might have some sense of how that's happening, but you've been working in this space as deeply as anybody, particularly in K-12 education. Can you just talk about outside of the school day, like where are kids interacting with AI? What are you seeing where kids, like for my own children, I think about Grammarly, for example, as a tool I've got a daughter who's a writer and does a lot of that, but we'll use Grammarly to help with just her thought process and obviously with cleaning up grammar and spelling and everything else associated with it. But I'm just kind of curious about that. So as teachers or administrators are talking with kids, they might be able to talk with them intelligently about where kids might be engaging with AI and one maybe where they can use it effectively and appropriately, but also in areas where they might need to be sure to be careful as well.
No, I appreciate that. I think I'm seeing it all over the place. And one of the areas is we'll start with the student work piece where there are some kids that are going out and they'll type in an assignment and bam, two
Yeah,
seconds.
yeah, Chat GPT, right, or whatever.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, it looks like Shakespeare's written or Stephen Hawking, depending upon your subject matter, has written your paper. And I would believe most students know that's wrong.
Yeah.
I do believe there are other kids that are trying to use this. They really don't understand what we're looking for from a district perspective because I don't think we've done a very good job of sharing that. And in most cases, when I'm in districts, it's from department to department, for even in a department, teacher to teacher. One of the things I've been really interested at, and I'll think Champaign District 4 again is doing some outstanding work in this space. We've talked about what it looks like maybe to co-author with an AI. And they're exploring that. And I know other districts are, but I've seen the rubric that they're working on. I really like what they're trying to put together. Where, to your daughter's behalf, if she's using Grammarly or even writing, in Gmail and you start typing and you get predictive words in, if you don't delete all those words, and we don't as adults,
Right.
we're co-authoring.
I tab those a lot. Like, yeah, that's
Absolutely.
exactly what I wanted to say.
Exactly.
Very
And so,
anticipatory. Yeah.
yeah, so we've got to teach our kids what is the acceptable practice
Uh,
for co-authoring with an AI, and do you have a district policy in place that can go across grade levels and be shared with parents and students? I think that eliminates a lot of the guesswork and helps us understand. And while I'm creating that document, I'm also wanting, as you're just saying this, I'm hitting tab. We're in the early stages of this. What I want to do is like, yes, that's what I was thinking. Then I go back, no, that isn't what I'm thinking. I don't want to ever have the AI doing it all for me where it takes and removes all of my agency. So I think we've got to figure that piece out as more and more kids use this more and more frequently. I think the other thing that I'm seeing some kids do is they're exploring the creative arts side of things. So if you go on Copilot and you use DALL-E 3 built in and you ask it to go make any image you want, it's amazing
yeah.
what you can make. Midjourney's another one. I use Copilot almost exclusively right now to make all the slides for my slide decks for my presentation because I can even get down. I did an SEL lesson for a study on World War One. The lesson was on World War One, but I thought I'm going to drop an SEL component in here. And so what I did was I asked the AI to make me a picture of a soldier looking at a teenager. And then I said, I want a blue background behind it because I want to have like a mournful feel to this. So I'm looking at the color of study to human emotion. And then my lesson is ask the student to compare and contrast the loneliness that a soldier in World War One felt in the trenches
Yeah.
as what he or she felt during the pandemic, during quarantine.
Yeah.
And so, but I can use those images now to generate all kinds of stuff. Unfortunately, there are kids that are making bad decisions with this. So there are a couple of kids up north back in the spring that made deep fakes of, students and teachers doing horrible things. And my understanding is there are multiple felony charges filed against those
Mm,
kids.
mm,
Uh, I I hate to say there's probably always going to be somebody that's going to push the envelope, but I'd like to think the vast majority of our students won't if they understand the consequences of what they're doing. But again, there's no one really talking about this, so they're going to go try and to explore. There are kids that are talking to intelligent avatars. If you get on um, Snapchat, you can use their avatar. It's supposed to have, like a simple AI engine built into it. I don't think that those things are horribly harmful right now, but I don't know if any of your viewership has watched the movie Social Dilemma on Netflix. They should really watch it. It's
yeah.
outstanding. They've also, the
Yeah, it's
producer,
sobering. It's a sobering Yeah, for
It
sure.
is. It is very sobering, and they've got the producers have got a podcast series called Your Undivided Attention, and they created one of their episodes. They told a story where they made a fake they made a Snapchat account for a mythical 13-year-old girl. And basically the girl talks to the intelligent agent and it works her back and forth how to have her first sexual encounter with a man who's 18 years older than her.
Mm,
And so you think about our kids whose minds are still moldable and they're shapeable. We don't know the impact that those things are happening right now in our kids. And so while what we did is circa 2000 was we handed cell phones and social media out to our kids like candy, we could potentially be doing the same thing right now. And I
yeah.
think we need to start thinking about the potential side effects before we just open things up and say kids go play with it. And I know companies can say, well, hey, we've got a disclaimer on there, 13 and up. I
Mm.
take a whole
Yeah,
lot to
yeah.
be 12 and get one. So
Well, and kids will not always be truthful in their ages
yeah.
and everything else. So we know how some of that can work. That was one question that I was thinking earlier, Joe, and you bringing it back up, talking about the companies. Are are they going to be able to get over the need for profit and protecting their shareholder value versus doing what we would expect, responsible citizen companies to do, right? I mean, I can see by the smile on your face that
Yeah.
concern there. I sure have it, just based off of my own experience and what I've observed and the various podcasts I listen to, and we haven't always we haven't always moved forward with the highest of intentions.
I have a lot of Pollyanna still in me at this age, but I
That's
will
wonderful.
say,
Keep beating
I,
that cynic aside, right? There you go.
yeah, but to your point, I mean, the bottom line drives so many of these companies, and so many of them live on razor thin margins anyway,
Sure.
that when you are in the competitive space, you are going to push the boundaries. And then there's also something that a lot of people don't talk about, but there's a national defense perspective here
Yeah.
between the United States and several other countries that are trying to become global leaders in this space. And some of them want us to have nothing but a pathway of policy in front of us that blocks every bit of innovation. And so
Hmm.
how do you create, I will say for our lawmakers, they have a tough decisions to make
Yeah.
because how do you create organic policy that makes sure this is safe while at the same time promoting innovation for the world's leading country in both development of new technology and for the national defense of this nation?
Yeah.
That's a very heavy task to carry right now.
Yeah, it's a heavy task to carry on a tight rope while they're walking along for sure. Well, just circling back to the survey, Joe, I just wanted to share a couple of my reactions, particularly, where IPA is concerned in all of this as well. And you and I've had a few of those conversations, but a couple of things that immediately came to mind, for school leaders as I see us navigating and where I see the association's going to have to work to pitch in. One that we discussed is just being able to have the headspace to work with AI. Our school leaders are tasked with so much. The school code has doubled in size in the last 20 years, and those aren't empty pages that we've stuffed in the school code. In fact, you can't even print it in one edition anymore. We have to do it in two, that we have so many laws. And so it's trying to make sure that we're not just, task oriented for the sake of doing things and making sure that we're really have our school leaders that are given the headspace and the time to lead, particularly in important areas like this. So that's obviously important. And there are a variety of things that factors at play there. One of course is managing policy and making sure that we're smart about it moving forward, where it could be a reduction of certain things and maybe retooling others and protective of something new that could come along. So that's critical. I think where I see us too is how do we move past just awareness building? Because I still feel like we're in that phase a bit. Obviously, that's part of what this conversation is for. But we've run some administrator academies. We've had sessions at our conference, and so what is it that we can do to be supportive of continuing with that? But but also, how do we help school leaders lead in the space? And I'll tell you, and this kind of goes back to making sure they have the headspace, but for our people, and it's interesting that this would be it because I think in some ways it goes along with this conversation related to technology is just supporting students' mental health and well-being. Like we this year, when I think about when our board met back in July to where we're at now, and what we're continuing to hear, mental health related issues, and here we are having conversations about whether we ban cell phones in schools and handle some of that or social media. So it's helping our people work through a lot of that stuff. And then the third, and this comes back to policy, but not with regards to like policy that impacts every day-to-day activity I've got going on or curricular types of decision. What I'm talking about here is helping lead in the area of how do we help school leaders create good, sound policy about the usage of AI, security around AI, protecting kids' privacy and data and all of that. We've done a little bit with that even within our own student handbook, but we know we got a long way to go here with staying current with what's going on. So three things they're a little convoluted because it's hard to disconnect any one of those things from each other. But as I was reading through the results of what you had and kind of where so many of our school leaders are you said ground zero. That is absolutely the right case. That's where the majority of people really
Mhm.
still are. And you've probably alluded to this, but when you think about somebody from being ground zero, and I'm going to let this kind of be the last thing for this conversation, Joe. I'm sure you and I will probably do this again at some point in time as your research and work with your dissertation and other things continues on. But what would be for somebody that's saying, I just got to know where to get started, and what would that be if you were in that person's shoes with where you are now, Joe? What would be that advice you'd give?
Oh boy, that's a great question. I think to me, one, I applaud you and your team and the IPA. You were one of the very first ones to, invite me on board and to have conversations. And every administrative academy I had was book solid. And
Yep.
we had a virtual coffee house back in January where we went from awareness training to just letting people share. And I think, honestly, I think there's call to do. It may or may not be you guys. You'll have to decide where you go with that. But I think there's definitely more need in that space. And if I was a district leader or a building administrator, I think I'd be coming to you guys or ISA and I'd say, okay, who's doing this well? And
Hmm.
I want to talk to them and I want to see the sharing. It's been delightful for me. I had, because of the groups, I've had a lot of calls from people just have been on the academies and just said, hey, can you talk here or there? And so I've gone to a lot of those schools, but the other piece of it's been they come to me and say, who can you connect me with that you know is doing this?
Yeah.
And they really appreciate the fact on their own time being able to have conversations that I always volunteer. Hey, if you want me on, that's fine. But if not, then go meet yourselves. And I think right now they need a clearinghouse. One of the things you and I talked about early on, I think we before we started doing these things was if I was an administrator, how would I know the information I'm getting is correct
Hmm.
and it's trusted? Because there's so much out there. And I think there needs to be somewhat of a clearinghouse space where they can come and say, Jason, can you guys give me two people that can talk about this that's working on language for a handbook? Do you know somebody that's doing great stuff with their teachers right now?
Yeah.
We've had some struggles with this area because it didn't work. Who's already been facing those things? That's where I'd look. I just if I'm a listener and I'm wanting to step out, I'd be brave and I would email your organization because I think you're a leader in this. I think ISTE is doing a really, really good job. Rich Coletta's group, they just signed a partnership with Google, where they're going to be doing a lot of work nationally on providing additional resources, but they also have great administrative toolkits there. If you're wanting to learn more about the AI space, I think listening to your undivided attention, sometimes it can get a little frightening sometimes because they just bring a lot of the realisms up there,
Yeah.
but they also tell, I think some of those people also talk a lot about the benefits. But I think you need to know both sides of it. And then, I'm available. They can find me on LinkedIn. Love to be able to connect or through you guys and just help out as you can. But I think to me, the big deal is don't sit around and worry about how far you behind you are. Realize that you're where you're at and that's where you're supposed to be. And if you put your team together, we've taken on a lot of challenges as school leaders over the course of time. We're going to figure this out. And I think at the end, the benefits, if we do this right, are far going to outweigh the bad. We just need to address the risk along with the benefits because some people aren't doing that right now. And we as school leaders don't have that luxury of doing those things. We got to make sure it's safe for our kids.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's good advice. Sure appreciate it, Joe, and look forward to continuing the dialogue with you. And thanks for your time and best of luck as you're plugging through that dissertation. I know.
Thank you.
Yeah. Good luck with
I can see
everything
the
going
end
like
there.
that.
It's just not quite there yet.
Yeah. No, I get it. That's you're in that grind phase right now. I sure understand that. Well, Joe Fatheree here with me talking about AI and the research that was done here with IPA and IASA here recently to work to get kind of an assessment of where we are, and I look forward to that helping inform conversations with the task force that you're working with in the governor's office as well. So excited about that too. My name is Jason Leahy, Executive Director of the Illinois Principals Association. As always, if there's anything that the association can do for you, don't hesitate to give us a call or check us out on the web at ilprincipals.org. Take care.